One of the legends of British golf instruction, along with John Jacobs, of course, was Leslie King, who, if memory serves, actually taught in a sporting goods store called Lillywhite's that was just north of Hyde Park. But he certainly had his own golf academy in Knightsbridge after that. And he, I think, was ahead of his time when he noticed that the left elbow should not be looking like the right one. He knew that the right one needed to be folded in so that as it attacked the golf ball, it would be underneath the left arm. And he thought that was best accomplished by having the left elbow pointing out toward the target. I completely agree. For the longest time, because of the influence of Ben Hogan's great book, The Five Lessons, who in that book advocated that the elbows look at their respective hips, a vast number of golfers, and of course the instructors associated with them, were teaching that the elbows be set that way. But it's very fascinating and interesting that if you look at the black and white often videos of Ben Hogan hitting golf balls, he would get ready and do his iconic waggle. And then he would start the swing by actually rotating that arm into the elbow out position that I and of course Leslie King advocated during the early part of the takeaway. Now, an acolyte of Ben Hogan's, Gary Player from South Africa, a wonderful golfer, he actually set up just as Ben Hogan advocated, but he had a different version. He would do the forward press, and his was very distinctly a kick of the right knee in toward the target, and then he would turn the arm and only then swing back. And so he, Leslie King, and I advocate that the elbow be looking out. And he advocated a wristy waggle, and I'll talk a little more about that here. I've always thought that the modern version is actually even more beneficial, which is the rather wooden one. I describe it as a windshield wiper slowly cleaning a small portion of the windshield. And it proves that you're in the right shapes, and it also shows you how to start the backswing. Leslie King subscribed to the idea that the waggle was used to relax the wrists and get some rhythm and get the hands to understand what their job was going to be. And that was fairly commonly how the waggle was explained all the way up until when I started doing my apprenticeship. So the material I got included that. At the time, though, the best golfer in the world was Jack Nicklaus, and he did a wristy waggle, but actually advocated that no intentional wrist action was used anywhere in the swing except the naturally occurring stuff that was as a consequence of the momentum of the club at the top of the swing and the power that you're applying in the opposite direction as you start down. So my recollection is that the British PGA actually quit talking about the waggle for a while in the material because they couldn't resolve those two seemingly contradictory ideas. Now, the wristy waggle, it was generally agreed, shouldn't be so elaborate and so lengthy that you, in terms of numbers, that you would freeze or lose balance or lose concentration. So he advocated about the usual, which is about 3 of them would be fine. Now, as I mentioned outside in the garden, that wristy waggle was something that Ben Hogan advocated, but he then started the swing thinking that the shoulders should be involved in that and that the wrists not be the only way that you move the golf club. In this, Leslie King agreed, because he thought that the takeaway is going to be a function of the movement of the hands and arms, very much the way I describe as a windshield wiper blade on a windshield, sort of independent of the body, he thought, briefly, and he mentioned 12 to 14 inches straight back, but keeping the club face aligned the way that your shoulder turn was aligned. He didn't think it should be low and straight back. Now, of course, Jack Nicklaus did think that. So the next thing that he advocated after the waggle was a thing called the forward press. Now, the forward press is, I described it as Gary Player's movement, which is a kick of the knees inward. Some people, and I notice even very subtly with Tiger Woods, as great a champion he is, that he does a little forward press by moving the hands a half an inch ahead. Nothing else seems to move, but he gets ready beautifully, very quiet and balanced, and then he just moves the hands and then takes the club away. And that actually applies, I think, valuable grip pressure, just the right amount, so that these things all stay very secure. And that's the hallmark of his golf swing. So we've got the bias that I described, and then we've got the waggle and the takeaway, and then we've got the initiator of the takeaway, which is the forward press. And as I recall mentioning outside on the lawn, Gary Player's version was to actually forward press, turn the elbow, and then swing back. So initiating the swing in these ways is going to be very consistent, and that was what they were after. And he thought that it was appropriate whether it was a chip shot or a full swing. So he thought, as have a few other very famous authors, that the primary job is to get into a position where you can attack the back of the ball. They don't want you driving it up in the air, arguably driving it intensely down. They want you driving it forward. And all of these shapes and activities and application of force are designed to accomplish that. The left arm orientation, which both Leslie King and I agreed should be pointed toward the target, should be accomplished in a process. And I always encourage people to start off reflecting on the fact that when most people stand erect with their spine vertical, shoulders level, symmetrical, that their arms hang with the thumbs turned in slightly, even if the elbows are looking backwards, more the way Ben Hogan advocated. And so I think that that's a resource. So you'll see many champions, Adam Scott, of course, from Australia is a good example, who might be right-handed, but he always starts off by grasping the club in his left hand down by his side. And the shaft is, the head of the club is between the feet, and of course nearer in with a short club, farther out with a long one, sloping across the knee. And your hand is a resource there because of the way it's hanging. With the thumb turned in, and you grip in the fingers in this fashion, when you pick up the club, you've essentially formed the grip already, and you've got the thumb right of center, and that's hugely valuable. Now here's the problem: when people pick it up, they very often turn their arm this way. And I pointed out to people that they've arrived here holding the club with their fingernails clearly visible. And so when you pick it up, don't let that happen. Pick it up and then immediately touch the other hand so that this one doesn't have the temptation to change again. So you pick it up from this position where you can't see the fingernails and attach the other hand, and the right palm covers the left thumb. You interlock like this, overlap, or 10 finger if you've got small hands. Then you've got to, of course, extend the arms and club because they're the radius of the golf swing. The center, the hub is your neck. And that's when I encourage people to do what I call bias, which is to rotate the left elbow to look out. Now, when you do that, your left shoulder goes up, your right one goes down, the right elbow is still bent because that's sort of natural, and you now have the arms biased, and your body is tilted in this fashion, which is characteristic of good golfers. In fact, the longer the club, the more that's going to be evident. Now, the problem is the club's over here. It's sort of drifted over in front of your right foot. So at this point, you don't lose what you've accomplished with the body, but you do have to rectify it. So you use your wrist to bring it back here. And you'll notice that it engages a lot of new muscles that you have to learn. And then once you've rectified it, so that the club is where the ball would be for that length of club, then you look at the club face and ask, does it need to be squared? Now, he rightly, Leslie King, pointed out there was a vulnerability in turning the arm in the shape that we want, because he knew that that also was accompanied by a tendency to exaggerate the turn of the left hand too far to the right. And this is absolutely true. So how I handle that and explain it to my clients is this. I have them lift up their arm in front of them, and I ask them to then turn the thumb all the way down to pointing at the ground, which is pretty much maxing it out into the bias shape that I encourage. Then I ask them to grasp the upper arm, because the upper arm is one bone, the humerus, and it's a ball and socket joint here. So we're really adjusting the shoulder, not the elbow. It's an indicator. And then watch that I can keep this firmly in this position and then rotate the hand back to whatever setting I want. Let's say that's slightly turned to the right where the fingers aren't quite visible and a couple of knuckles, maybe 2.5 of the knuckles are visible, and that the thumb slightly right of center. So it's totally possible to put the arm in the right shape without exaggerating the turnover to the right of the left hand. It just takes a little practice and familiarity. With regard to Leslie King's opinion about the forward press, which is the term given to this little setting of the body to initiate the backswing, it's forward because generally those movements, as I described with Gary Player, are toward the target, which is interesting. It's almost like a rebound, which is what initiates the backswing. So the common one is the subtle pushing of the hands ahead. I described Tiger Woods as having a small example of that. The more obvious one is the idea of kicking the knee in, and in Gary Player's case, biasing the arm and then taking it back. And what Leslie King preferred was that if it's naturally occurring, it's a good idea, but he never taught it as a requirement or inevitable that it be part of how you play golf. And he's right, it actually does occur in some people. They just get ready and then they sort of do a little sort of reset of their body and then go, and that's what a forward press is. So don't add it if you don't naturally do it.